still want me to monitor the waiting room so you don't have to do that in the course of the meeting?
No, I can monitor that.
Okay, great. Thank you. And that's the last you'll hear of me.
Thanks for your help.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I'm going to resume the meeting of the Manzanita Planning Commission. Still April 21st, but it's 4:18 in the afternoon. We had a bit of a bubble, but let's hope that that's over and done with. And thank you so much for your patience, and please bleach your eyes after you're done with this, whatever you need to do. Okay, we were just about to ask for any members of the audience that had anything that wanted to bring in front of the commission that's not related to the housing ordinance update today. You have any thoughts that you'd like to share, please raise your hand.
And I do not have any hands raised.
Okay, thank you. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the March 10th minutes. I'm assuming that since they were attached to the packet that we received, everyone has been able to read the minutes. Are there any questions, comments, corrections, errors, omissions that we need to do for the March 10th minutes? Okay, hearing none, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes as submitted.
I'll go ahead and move that we approve the minutes of our meeting from March 10th, 2025 as written.
That's Frank. I'll second it.
Okay, thank you, Frank. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Okay, looks like that's approved. Thank you. All right, and because we've had a little delay, I'm just going to jump right ahead and ask Scott or Marcy to please pick up where we need to pick up. And I'm going to breathe for a minute.
Marcy, if you'd like, I could just do a quick introduction and I'll hand it over to you.
Sounds good, Scott.
Awesome. Well, it's actually pretty exciting. We are at the point now where we have some code that we want you all to consider for adoption for the middle housing work that we've been doing for now over 6 months. So we've had a lot of discussion with this. We had a lot of discussion with the public, with the planning commission, the steering committee for the comprehensive plan, also with you all, the planning commission. And just to remind you what this is, it's kind of a piece of that overarching comp plan effort, but this was a specific grant that we got from DLCD to bring our middle housing code, basically our residential code up to the state standards for middle housing. Manzanita received a grant to help with that. That grant expires in June. And our goal as a city and as a planning commission and as a community has been to adopt this code through the process we've been going through so that we can meet those requirements. And just a quick reminder, if the code isn't adopted by June, it's not the end of the world, but we will then default to the model code that the state has put out there, which doesn't include a lot of the things that we've been working on. So it's advantageous for us to move through this, and make sure that it matches everything that we want as a community, and also meets the state requirements. So I guess I'll just leave it at that. There's some urgency here, but the real urgency is to make sure that we get this right. So with that, I think I'll hand it to you, Marcy, and we can jump into the presentation. Oh yeah, Tom has a question.
So remind me, so there's a steering committee that has looked at these very changes, and have they endorsed them or put their imprimatur on this?
So they haven't endorsed them. We did a community workshop that really focused on the housing types that we are required to do, and then some that, again, that Marcy keeps saying that we can do on top of what's required.
Okay.
So we had that workshop. So we got public input there, and that was part of the comp plan process. And that steering committee was also involved with that outreach effort. So I would say that they were kind of involved in the initial ideas and development of some of the things that go beyond maybe what we're required to do. But you as a planning commission are really the group that has viewed this in detail in terms of down to the words.
And so we're the initial decision maker after
Correct.
us to the city council.
Yes.
Okay, and one other question, if we don't do it by June, we revert to the statewide mandatory thing, but we are still, we're not back at square one. We can continue with our own review and say in July. do it.
Yes.
Not that I'm proposing delay, I just want to know what happens beyond default.
Yes, thank you, Tom. That's a very good clarification. We don't just start from square one. All our work does not go down the toilet. We are just here to push on the adoption. So if it happens to take, us an extra meeting or council an extra meeting, we'll have to deal with that. Now, that being said, in an ideal world, we all like what's presented. We have some small changes and we can, move after our next meeting. We still have another meeting after this to discuss this.
Okay, sorry, one more question.
Sure.
In that window, someone could put in an application and it would be subject to the default
Yes.
standards because it's whatever standards at the time of application. Right. So all right. Thank you. I'm done.
So yeah, Tom, now that's a really good question too. So that's kind of, if you will, the risk is that if it wasn't adopted by the deadline, the June deadline, then we would default to that. And if applications came in during that window, they would fall under that model code. Thank you for those questions. Very good.
And I just want to follow up on that model code is something that we as a planning commission have not seen. So I can't imagine what the discrepancies would be, and I'm really hopeful that we can present something to city council that they can adopt, at least as far as the housing portion goes. I know we're going to have to go back through and redo some additional ordinance work based on the rest of the comprehensive plan to make sure that everywhere our comprehensive plan new goals will match our ordinance. So I think we may be able to go back and finesse some things later if we have to, but I'm really hopeful that we can, well, you know what I think.
Karen, that's a really good point too. I think that that's something that I want everyone to realize here too, is that there are bigger picture concepts that we have discussed as a commission and with the larger community around housing, affordability, housing mix, all these different things that we can continue to address through the comp plan process. And if it comes down to it, the comp plan may say things like, may make recommendations like, hey, let's look at our commercial zone. Let's look at some of our mixed uses, some of those other things that are kind of beyond the scope of this very focused middle housing code, update where we're really trying to meet what's required of the state. But the cool thing is, because this group has been really listening to the community and kind of trying to think out of the box, I think that you'll notice that we're not just doing what's required. You're thinking, long term and about other things that we can do within the scope of this code update. But I think it's important to know that this isn't the last chance you'll ever have to look at code updates in the future. Bert?
Oh yeah, this is great. The comments you just made are important. I think is that focusing on this middle housing in a very small aspect of the bigger picture, right? And this looks to be able to accomplish that. But I hope as the comprehensive plan moves forward that we can encompass a more modern interpretation of land use and design guidelines and form-based code as part of that more significant redo of the land use code. This is remodeling, an 80s code a little bit to meet this deadline. And I think we will make great progress, but we should all remember that we do need to come back to it to make sure that the community grows with grace and in the way that everybody wants.
Thanks, Bert. And John?
Just when I looked at what Marcy and Herbsworks has done, it looks like we've talked about parking and things like that. That's not a state mandated thing, is it? Or I don't know. Marcy can answer that question. I guess I'm asking a question here.
Yeah.
The
I'll let Marcy
basic
answer.
parking the reduction in parking requirements is a state mandate.
It is
So,
a state mandate.
yeah,
Okay.
that part of it is, but we have talked about in concept allowing parking on street to count and having
Right.
some different kind of street edge treatments. That's above and beyond.
Okay. And just so to clarify in my mind, if we do miss the July date and we revert to the state model, when we do approve our new code, it goes back and supersedes the state. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Marcy, the show is yours.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to try making this PDF an entire screen. So I don't know if I lose the ability to see people, but I've never done this. Let's see, full screen mode. Oh, good. I can still see everybody. So first of all, I want to say thanks for this, for being here and bearing with this process. Now we are, as Scott said, really getting into a lot of the detail. Some of it is, I know, a lot to take in all at once, and I'm pretty sure that we're going to have another work session. There are more details to work out, but what your package consists of right now is the things that I got pretty good agreement on as a code concept at the last meeting. Therefore, I've turned them into amendments language. There are some code concepts that people may be want more discussion about. So there's certainly, this is the time to talk about those. For example, the floor area ratio concept. But there are also additional concepts that I didn't get very clear response to last time. And so before we leave, I want to make sure that I have enough information to come back with amendments for those things. So that's why this agenda says we're going to discuss this whole package. I'm going to break it down for you because I think it's pretty, it might be somewhat disorienting. The way that it's organized wasn't exactly what I had envisioned, but and there are a lot of attachments and there's a lot of sections of your code that we're not changing, but you see it anyway, and it's many, many, many pages. But I'm going to break it down so it's simple and we can take it piece by piece. But the goal is to get to the end of this session with amendments that you agree on, I can move forward with, and concepts that you can offer me more direction about, I can move forward on amendments for those. Does anybody have a question at this point or suggestion for the agenda? I don't see any hands, so. Okay, I'm going to move forward. If I can, my computer will allow me to. Okay, so I wanted to go over, let me move the people over here. Just a kind of an accounting of where we were at the last meeting and what I'm presenting to you. There have been some adjustments or refinements, I would say, but these are the things that we talked about in concept at the last meeting. I'm just going to go through these bullet points one by one. We agreed to go ahead and reduce the number of use zones from 5 to 2 and an overlay. What I've presented to you, though, is actually 3 separate base zones, and I decided that that was a cleaner way to go through this. So it's we are still reducing from 5, but now we have 3 new base zones that replace those 5. So the middle housing 2 is not an overlay, it's a new base zone. Also, to meet your mandate to me, where the have to do's and want to do housing types are allowed everywhere. There's none of this, some here, some there, they're completely intermixed. And now that we have an middle housing 1 or MH1 and 2 and 3, we're going to treat those all with a form-based code approach. So we'll have the larger sizes in MH2 and smaller sizes in MH1 and MH3. Actually, I think I got that wrong. Sorry. It's MH1 is the smaller sizes and MH2 and MH3 are the larger sizes. So for example, the townhouses in MH1 are limited to 2 attached. In MH2, you could have more, say up to 4, or potentially even more in the MH3 zone. Yeah, so that's where we were last month and where we are today. I want to give you a little hint about the package that if you want to follow along in the package, I've identified the pages that I'm going to be talking about, the PDF bookmark. If you use bookmarks, you can go to that. But the easiest way to think about this package is through this table. So I'm going to walk you through the table one by one, and raise your hand if you can't read this text. I'll make this slide bigger. Anybody having a problem reading the text? Brad, sure. I'm sure you're not the only one. Let me, if I can. Bert.
Try these bifocals. Anybody that can't. see.
Let's see, I can't quite get it to increase. Yeah, I was worried that this,
You might have to exit out of full screen, yeah.
right, I'm sorry, I guess I do. So let me make this bigger. I can control that more easily this way. All right, so preceding the track change amendments to your code text, I gave you a table. This is supposed to help orient us overall to where you're going to see the track change edits, which chapter, which article. So now as soon as I go through this overview, we're going to go through each of these sections from the top to the bottom. In Article 1, Introductory Provisions, we're changing Section 1.030 to add all the definitions of the new housing types. And there's also another amendment in there that isn't resolved yet. It's about the use of the term family. We'll discuss that when we get there. And then I'm amending the list of the zones and amending the maps. So that's what these 3 sections here are for. And then the next part of the table explains that in the use zones article, we're changing all of these sections. We are reducing the number of use zones from that number to 3. We're explicitly listing and permitting the housing types in the use table. So along with the single dwelling, you will now see a listing of the multi-dwelling and duplexes and etc. This is also where we have development standards that permit the housing types that we've discussed. And this is also where we're establishing a floor area ratio because one does not exist yet for residential use. And this is also where we set up a give back program. And we're increasing the maximum height to 35 feet. But you'll see all these changes when we get to that article. In supplemental provisions, there's just a little bit of text that I've taken out since we're going to be replacing multifamily or apartment criteria with form-based code standards. And then in the off-street parking, we're striking current requirements for parking to be located on the same lot. We're also going to permit required parking spaces to be located on-street instead of on-site. And we're customizing the on-street parking approaches. As we've discussed in the past, these may also be have to be amended in the Public Works standards. And we're allowing shared parking arrangements, which are not permitted now. And then we're reducing the number of parking spaces. So that's the I know the packet seems very long, but that's all that we're doing, which is a lot, but it's somewhat limited. Yeah, we have some questions. So I think I saw Gary, I think I saw Bert raise his hand, and Karen, do you still want to ask a question?
No questions, go ahead.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So if I just want to make sure that I understand what you're talking of, you're calling these use zones. Are we keeping the designations of R2, R3, R4, or those are going to completely go away? And we'll be talking about MH1, MH2, MH3.
Yes.
So
The
the
latter.
in the Amendment A, those are really just for our reference to see compare how things look now to how things will look in the future. But the R zone maps will disappear.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, thank you. That answered my question.
Bert, did you still have a question?
Nope, no question.
All right,
I think it
so
was Lee that had his hand up.
Lee, yeah, please, Lee.
Hi, Marcy.
Hi.
I'm confused a little bit with all the material that we got, and happily you already referenced it as a lot, so I appreciate that. You made comment a moment ago, correct me if I'm wrong, that MH1 was going to be limited in terms of the number of units. Does that kind of fall in line with your thinking?
MH1, since I am in this view, I'm going to go to the maps and just show middle housing 1 is what it will become what is now R2.
Okay, well, my confusion lies in looking at the chart that came with the material in the packet. It shows that in MH1, triplexes and quadplexes are permitted. So was this a preliminary table to kind of get our juices wet until we figure out where we're going?
I'm sorry, you said those housing types are what?
Permitted.
Yes, they're permitted, but they may have some supplemental standards that go in this section here. So jumping back up to the table of contents, here, middle housing supplemental provisions. That is where we would define that there may only be 2 in MH1, but more attached in the other zone.
Okay, so to be clear, MH1 does allow for numbers of attached units beyond 2.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Oh, and I do have a follow-up question to that. You've mentioned floor area ratio a couple of times. I was going to wait until you actually got to that, but I'm going to ask it now. In your experience, does floor area ratio include garages?
Yes, typically it does.
Really? Okay. That's going to really limit, potentially, that's going to really limit what people can do with the amount of space available on the land. Just my thoughts.
Sure. I mean, and we are here to discuss that. I know that floor area ratio proposal, it's something that you asked me to come back to you with. And what I've come back with is a draft concept. So we'll need to talk about it. That idea that you just posed about not maybe exempting garage space from FAR, that's done in commercial areas. So we could discuss doing it here.
Okay.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Sure. Now I would like to go back up to the top and start here. And for some reason I have a landscaping service outside at our neighbor's house. So let me know if you can't hear me. This is the beginning of the many paged zoning ordinance. It's your zoning ordinance, so I'm sure you're all relatively familiar with this. And what I have done is simply made it clear what we're changing in terms of, let me make this a bit bigger. Proposed text is bold and deleted text is struck through. And so another little tip for you is a quick way to know which pages we've changed if you're scrolling through the PDF is to look for the pink. And so starting with the first change that we're making in this table of contents is that we are renaming and reorganizing the use zones. You'll see Middle Housing 1, MH1 replaces R2. And Middle Housing 2, MH2 replaces R3 and R4. And further down, SRR is replaced with MH2. Let's see what happened to that. This is supposed to be replaced with MH3. Missed that one. Any questions about that? When we get to 4160, or this section that's called supplemental provisions, which is where kind of all of the additional to land use or development standards are, this is where those live, things that apply to home occupations, for example. Though we will have a new section here. I've given it this name, this number 4.160, that may change, but that is where all of the standards for the townhouses and cottage clusters and plexes, that's where they will live. Those are in draft form. At this point, we'll need another work session to go through those. And I also didn't want to load a lot of more information on you at this point. All right, so I'd like to go through the introductory provisions and talk about the definitions now. So jumping to the pink text. Let me see if I've got most of the changes on single page. Okay, so we are adding an accessory dwelling unit definition, cottage cluster definition. We're changing multi-family to multi-unit, and we're also saying that a multi-dwelling unit means a building that contains 5 or more. So we struck through the word 3, and that is because we have plexes that go up to 4, and so everything 5 or more would be considered a multi-dwelling unit. Any questions about that?
So,
And
Marcy,
yes, is that Tom?
yeah, are these definitions consistent with state law?
Yes,
Okay, so they're in the ORS somewhere.
yes.
Okay.
So I don't know if I need to go through each of these, but a quadplex is 4 and a triplex is 3, and the townhouse is a dwelling unit that's part of a row of 2 or more attached, and they're each on their own lots. So, and you didn't have a definition for that before. Then.
Sorry, me again.
Yeah.
Courtyard apartments. Do they go under another name?
I'm going to consider those. Let me see.
We've
I
been
think that
talking
they're
about
going
them.
to be considered a, I think the way I would like to deal with those in 4.160 supplemental standards is they're simply an attached cottage cluster.
Okay.
Now, the cottage cluster, just a little information about the state requirement for cottage clusters. They're quite particular. This is the definition for those, a grouping of no fewer than 4 detached dwelling units per acre with a footprint of less than 900 square feet each and a common courtyard. And in supplemental standards, I will be making clear that an attached version of those is permitted. So I guess this would mean that we would probably want to change this word right here, detached, or detached or attached. Bert.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. Obviously, there's a lot of information here, so we can change from that 4 units per acre, which doesn't really seem applicable to our community, to something more like 4 units per 9,500 square foot lot or something like that, can't we?
You know, this is you raised the question that always gets asked about cottage clusters. This is language from the ORS, and I've never totally understood what 4 detached dwelling units per acre means. I may have to do more talking to state people about this, but this is the cottage cluster is the housing type that has no maximum density on it. It's the one we talked about the last meeting. I think, John, you said that's my kind of housing type. It is totally form-based. It's very it's very prescriptive in terms of the size of the dwelling units and the amount of common area that has to be provided per each dwelling unit and the size of each dwelling unit. But if you meet all of those other standards, you do not have to be under a certain density. It's like what you can put on the site is how it's defined. And so I think this, to your point, Bert, I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I actually think it's meaningless in the end.
Well, maybe you just strike the units per acre or something like
I'm
that.
not sure if we can. And that's kind of a question I need to vet with some state support people.
Okay, well, it doesn't make sense. You have 4 900 square foot units on an acre as an example. So maybe just look into that one. Another question I have is about co-housing and group homes and some different kinds of housing that doesn't seem to fit right in well with all these definitions at the moment. And maybe I'm missing something.
You know, the group, I don't know if we want to go into this. Maybe we can talk about when we get to the use table, because your code is out of date in terms of state licensed group living situations. This is an area where it needs to be updated and made conforming to current definitions with state rules for licensing and formation of these types of institutional living. This is also not necessarily addressing your question about co-housing. Co-housing to me is not something that is has to be spelled out in the development code.
But the requirement to have kitchens and stuff like that, if that's part of the code, would kind of make co-housing have to have kitchens in each of the, say, cottages, as opposed to a common kitchen that's very common with co-housing, shared facility.
Agree. And you could do what we could do what some cities have done, which is allow separate bedroom units. I think there's some precedent for that, and I can look into if you would like to explicitly permit.
Yeah, maybe just kind of check that out so that we don't preclude somebody doing a senior co-housing project with a group kitchen and living room and stuff like that in separate buildings.
Okay, John.
Can we, I'm still a little unsure about the cottage cluster. Is our goal in most of our discussion has been limiting the size of and density of different types of units. This seems to be kind of the opposite of that. I mean, 4 900 square foot units per acre is like a lot of land and very little housing. I know that the cottage cluster that we've approved, the one I was involved in is like 14 units per acre, something Scott can probably correct me if I'm wrong, but and I think the one at the end of Dorcas is similar to that. Did you say this was a state mandated definition or a state definition?
Yes, and I do want to clarify that this a grouping of no fewer than four
No,
detached
yeah.
dwelling units. This, I want to make sure everyone's reading that. That is a protection against having a cottage cluster that's not very dense.
Agree. That's what I thought we were trying to, but I would think we would want it closer to the 14 than the 4.
Yes. So am I hearing that? So there are places definitely in between the ORS and the model code where there are choices that a city can make. And if it is something that you'd like me to push toward is a choice, if there is a choice area in terms of more dense, like a minimum number of is required of cottages in a cottage cluster, we can certainly either word that in the definitions here or word it explicitly in the supplemental standards for cottage clusters.
Yeah, either way, if there is flexibility in either the ORS or the model code, I would like to see that number denser,
Okay.
maybe 10 or, pick a number. But like I said, the ones we've approved have been 14-ish, I believe.
Yeah, John, I think that's probably the way to tackle it so that it's not an inefficient use of land, is just to increase
Right.
the density requirement.
And if we put it in our supplemental conditions, that's okay too. But I would think we need to do what the state mandates. If that's their definition, we have to do it. But I would like to pick it up in the supplemental if we can.
But that's the state mandate is the minimum we can
Right.
exceed.
Yes, agree.
I would like
I
to have
think
a
that-
higher minimum
Yeah,
in the city if we can make that happen.
I think there is precedent for that.
Let me jump in if I may. I too would like a higher density, but it's not, I can't envision an acre. I don't know what that looks like. I don't want to make it so dense that this type of housing becomes unattainable. Like someone says, we're never going to have a cottage cluster here because you have to have so many. But 4 per acre does sound to me, even with my lack of imagination, that's a little bit of house on a lot of land, right?
Yes, I agree. Let's table the discussion about cottage clusters. I'll come back to you with more deliberation on where cities have a choice and where many cities have landed, and also what these look like.
Yeah, that would be helpful, at least to me.
Could I just add just one more comment as far as where we put things? We're only looking at the definitions right here, and it's really helpful if all of the definitions for everything that we are defining is in one place. So that we don't have to look at it, yes, but there's another definition that we have to deal with somewhere else. That's my goal is to make sure that anytime you need to look something up, what does that mean? It's in this place. And then if there are additional conditions that belong to it, then those can be supplemental or wherever else.
I agree, Karen. That's what my job is to do that.
Okay, thank you. I
Sure.
don't want to belabor, but just wanted to be clear. Thank you.
I mean, the elegant balance between what's in definitions and what's in supplemental standards is, yes, there's no duplication. The definition is somewhat descriptive, but simple enough, encompasses all of the things that the supplemental standards require or permit. And there's no conflict between the two and no duplication. So that's where we will wind up. I do want to point to this dwelling unit, so I'm working through what you have worked on in the past regarding accessory dwelling units. I'm trying to incorporate that work into this package. An accessory dwelling unit is not actually a required middle housing type, but I think that we can build it into this package. So all that I've really provided at this point, while I'm trying to reconcile the language, is the way that you describe this in your Planning Commission public discussion memo from 2021 as a reference. And other than that, I don't have a conclusion about it yet. Does anybody want to talk about the accessory dwelling unit before we move on? I don't hear anything. I did put in this definition, which is kind of the official state definition for accessory dwelling unit, though, as a proposal to take out, I'm sorry, for a dwelling unit. This is the official state definition for a dwelling unit. And then lastly, I think we're almost to the end of definitions. I want to point out this family. There's apparently new legislation that all of us code amenders for middle housing have to be up to date about. And I'm still trying to get exactly what the language is for this definition that is not considered to be out of compliance with ORS 90.112, which restricts cities from limiting occupancy based on familial relationship. So I will be back with a new a more certain state sanctioned definition for that in the next package. Okay, so moving on. You may notice that I have the height of building highlighted. We're not changing this, but I did want people to be aware that this is how you currently measure height of buildings. So we may want to return to this when we talk about the height increase that is being proposed. So now to the next section, which is to look at attachment A. And these are the maps. These start on page 6 to 7 of your PDF, or they're bookmarked as attachment A, new zones maps. You wanted to look at them. There's a map here, a base map for reference, but the R2 zone isn't being proposed as middle housing 1. Let me go to this graphic. That's middle housing 1 on the right. And middle housing 2 is a combination of R3, R4, and RMD. And then the SRR zone is a third base zone. Are there any questions about this? This is consistent with the proposal from last time. I think that there was pretty solid agreement on this. Except I will just say, Karen, you brought up that you wanted to have a discussion about this RMD possibly becoming a different zone, but maybe you could remind me what that conversation was about. And I also see Bert has raised his hand. Bert.
Yeah, just a question. These are essentially based upon the existing zones. And did you do any math associated with, is this actually increasing the overall density within the city, or is it kind of keeping it the same? Or that's one question. And then an auxiliary question is if it's not, I mean, you know, the R2 zone is 2 units, a townhouse with common wall, for instance, which is up and down my street already. do we need to consider modifying the areas of some of these zones if that's where the increase in density is actually going to happen? And as an example, the R4 and R3 zone, does a boundary of that need to increase as just a point of conversation, or other areas the boundaries need to increase in order to increase the capacity and utilization of pretty scarce land in the city?
Well, I'm starting from a point of understanding that many of your lots, a third to a half of your lots are not conforming in terms of size. So today, on paper, you could build 2 dwelling units per lot. It's in the code, but you have to have 2,500 square feet each to do that. And many of your lots are not 5,000 square feet. And this is probably a legacy of Manzanita being a resort town that was platted. And then in the 60s or 70s, when the state, instituted statewide land use planning, you probably got a copy paste code from someplace else that said 5,000 square foot lots were, what you have, but you actually don't have 5,000 square foot lots. They were probably smaller in the resort plat. So I don't know if this makes sense, but if nothing else, we are starting with the fact that you can now truly build 2 dwelling units on every lot. So we are kind of doubling the density to begin with. Then we're also allowing all of these different housing types, like all of the housing types that are in the middle housing code are going to be allowed in R2. They're going to have to meet a smaller form. As we mentioned, townhouses, we talked about limiting those to 2 attached. So you might have something that looks like a regular Manzanita house today, but it's actually 2 attached units on their own lot. But they look like a house. But in R3 and R4, you might be able to have up to 4. So the goal was to have kind of bigger densities in these areas, but still doubling the density as a basic step forward.
Yeah, maybe it's the minimum lot size, which is what effectively will increase the overall development compactness, right? So if we're at 1,250 as an example, then on a 5,000 square foot lot, you should be able to do 4 units, correct?
Yes.
And
You
so,
could do 4 units on their own lot, but
yeah,
you can also do 2 units without having to divide the land.
well, that's kind of the question I have is limiting it to 2 units as opposed to 4 units. Does that, if you understand where I'm headed, is it more effective to talk about these different housing types and then really control how much gets put on a site by the unit or the lot size?
Yeah, let me see if we should probably move into talking about the housing types that are permitted, because quadplexes are permitted in your middle housing 1. So if somebody can make 4 units fit in a smaller housing shape that we're going to be creating for middle housing 1, they could do 4 units. Or they could subdivide and do 1,250 or slightly greater lots. So I feel like we should talk about the uses that are permitted and maybe start there, that are permitted in each of the zones. Brad?
Yeah, thanks, Marcy. Picking up a little bit on what Bert is asking, can you clarify, and maybe I can give you an example to help, but I'll just ask the question straight up first. Does the PUD then, does a a PUD overlay into, say, an MH1 or an MH2, where, say, for example, somebody is doing 4 units on a 5,000 square foot lot, what is the criteria to define a PUD and how it would work in one of these zones?
So in the last packet, we brought forward the new land division chapter that's replacing your current land division or subdivision chapter. That really supersedes the PUD process. It says how lots can be divided, what the criteria for lot division is, what the criteria for the housing types and how they have to face the street, how much frontage they need to have, et cetera. That's going to be part of the supplemental standards in your 95-4 ordinance. So I don't know if people have had a chance to read the land division chapter.
So are you saying a PUD
Doesn't exist.
will not exist going forward?
Yes, it will be replaced by really clear criteria for lot size and orientation and street frontage, access for utilities. All of that is,
But that hasn't been fully vetted or defined in its entirety yet. Is that correct?
it's in the land division draft that was part of your packet last month.
Maybe
Yeah.
can you just apply in a sentence or two how that would, maybe I missed it and I apologize, and I'll go back and take a look, but can you apply that as an example on an MH1 or an MH2 where maybe 4 units are on one lot? That new criteria?
You mean instead of the PUD?
Yeah, what would that look, how would that look in this instance? Would that, those, for example, here's what I'm getting at is, whether it's parking or no need for a variance.
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly what your question is. So there are 2 ways that somebody, say, could build 4 units on a lot in the future that we're trying to create with the middle housing. They could subdivide the land through this new land division ordinance that expedites the process of dividing land, and you would have to meet the standards for the minimum lot size and required frontage for utility access. You'd still have to meet the required parking, etc. But you'd be able to do it under the new land division ordinance, which is much more clear and objective. But you could also build 4 dwelling units as a quadplex and then not divide the land at all. But then you'll have to meet the supplemental standards for quadplexes.
So Marcy, I think the important thing is the clear and objective piece. And that's one of the reasons why we're removing the PUD, right? Is that there is no clear and objective pathway that's required by the state using the current PUD process. Is that correct, or am I wrong?
Yeah, that's correct. The PUD process is a thing that was created in the 60s, 70s when developers didn't want to stick to, the base zone. They didn't want to do just one type of housing across a larger site. They wanted to mix up different housing types. They wanted to do a little bit of what would be allowed in the R1 mixed with a little bit of what would be allowed in the R4. And they had to go through this extremely arduous process, which I think puts a lot of unnecessary burden on the developer, especially in an environment where we are going to be allowing more mixed housing types, and we have clear and objective design standards that have to be met. So the PUD really not necessary anymore.
Which is
Yeah.
actually a good thing for you as a commission too, because some of those decisions that are made, it'll be easier to make the decisions because we'll have a clear and objective path, which is required by state.
And you're going to have an expedited middle housing land division process, which allows you can get a permit for building at the same time that you get a permit for land division. So it does sound like people might have missed the land division chapter that we sent out before, and I'll make sure that you get a copy of that. Are there any more questions? So I want to explain what I'm going to talk about the uses and how we merged these different use zones into the three. And as you might remember from the attachment of the last packet where I laid out in a table all of the different zones and all of their different uses and all of their different development standards side by side in a tabular format, you have most of the land uses are allowed across multiple zones. It's not completely clear to me why you had so many different zones. But there were some places where we had to blend some things together, and I kept a log of them. They mostly have to do with these adult foster home, residential facilities, and also manufactured dwellings. So let me just go through these. This set here, something that I brought up a little bit when I was talking to you, Bert, about co-housing. These do need to be updated to be consistent with state licensing for these and definitions for these types of homes and facilities. But that is be a little bit beyond this project, but I recommend that that be undertaken at a later date. When we talk about manufactured dwelling, right now, this manufactured dwellings are only allowed in RMD. But that law has changed and they're now allowed everywhere. So that we are able to merge that use into all three zones. And as you can see, RMD is part of MH2 now. But you can also see, I guess the main thing is that all of the housing types are allowed in all three zones. What will determine how big or small they are will be in the supplemental standards. Then we have these other uses as well, and merged those three zones. And the reason that it became clear that we need to keep SRR separate is mostly because they have some uses that are totally unique, like motels, hotels. And this tabular format of land use in a table will replace many pages of your narrative listing of land uses, use zone by use zone. That's why there are a lot of pages in the code that are struck through. So that's the uses, but I do want to talk about the development standards because I think these are really important in terms of a form-based approach. But before I move on to the development standards, any questions? Bert?
Well, I think that the uses and where they're permitted beyond the housing is something that needs to be taken a hard look at. And while that may not be the purview of this particular effort, it's important that as part of the comprehensive plan that probably gets adjusted.
Can you be more specific? Are you talking about where commercial uses are allowed or not allowed?
Yeah, like there was discussion about somebody wanting to have a corner store, I think, in which would be, the old SRR zone. And just want to make sure that live work and some of those other things are allowed. And I'm not sure why bed and breakfast are currently not allowed in MH3, where it makes sense since you can actually do a hotel in MH3 right now.
Mhm.
So some of that stuff I think needs a finer grain of analysis at some point.
I agree with that. And I think that should be something that you ask for as part of your comprehensive plan, further ordinance amendment updates.
Okay. Put it on the radar.
One benefit of seeing it in a table, though, is that you can see those things that don't make sense. Whereas I think for many years, it's easy to overlook them because you're reading zone by zone and the land uses are all listed and they often don't have the same exact names, et cetera. So this is a better system, I think, for minding in the future. Okay, can we talk about the development standards that apply? And you will see that we've instituted a minimum lot size that's a lot smaller than what you currently have. And per direction that I received, I eliminated a minimum width and a minimum depth. And what I say here in this note is that I feel pretty comfortable eliminating the required lot width and depth standards. Right now, you require 40 feet and 90 feet, or 90 feet, 85 feet, respectively, in 2 different zones. But as we're going to be instituting a floor area ratio, if we do, combined with the setbacks and the parking requirements, I think those are going to have a greater determining effect on lot size. Does anyone feel we need to discuss this further before we move forward? Okay. Bert?
I hate to occupy the conversation, but are we sure that these shouldn't be less is the only question in terms of the yards. And so that's the only question as we get into a cottage cluster or quadplex or something like that. Do these need to be less than what we've had before?
Bert, I think that's a good question and discussion topic, particularly because we've had a couple of recent development proposals with front yard setback requests to reduce front yard setback numbers. So I think that's a good conversation topic.
For residential uses?
Yes.
Okay.
Multifamily use, yes.
Okay.
So are we having that now?
Marcy, I didn't mean to hijack your meeting, but
I think we should have it at the next work session when we have more of the supplemental standards and some 3D tests that we can look at.
that makes sense. And I think that, yeah, that makes sense.
Marcy, not to add to your burdens, and you've done an excellent job so far. I want to note that, but as you've gathered, not being an architect or a developer or a builder or anything, I have a tough time with the numbers. And so a 20 front yard setback, I can't envision those things. If there's some way you could put pictures to dimensions for the handicapped like me, that would be really helpful to try and figure out what you're talking about. I mean, is 20 yards, is that a lot? I don't like mowing 20 yards, but
20 feet, yeah, 20 feet is
20
a
feet,
lot.
okay.
20 feet is a lot, and so the way these tables work is the unit of measurement is off to the left, so that we can get the numbers, just the numbers, and not a lot of words in the table, so it's easier to compare. But yeah, 20 feet is quite a generous, old-fashioned kind of front yard, and I kept it in here because I'm not I'm interested in the discussion. So if people would like to look at that, we'll come back with some 3-dimensional testing that shows 20 feet different.
Well, whenever Bert speaks up about these things, and it catches my attention, and I'm trying to think what this is. And I will go out with a tape measure after this meeting and try and envision that. But if you've got something that makes it easier to see than to intuit from numbers, that would be helpful, at least to me.
Well, and Tom, it's even more difficult because of the way the street right-of-ways are. A lot of your street right-of-ways are a lot wider than the actual pavement is, so you have this perceived larger setback than actually is from the property line in many of the properties in Manzanita. So I can see why it's difficult to envision what 20 feet is from a front yard, you know?
Okay.
So, but I guess I would say that 20 feet is a very standard front yard. Lots of times if people are doing alley fed where your garage is in the back, they'll push it to 10 or 5 feet even, but that's not a standard. Well, over the last 50 years, it's not a standard. You know, tighter than 20 is not standard. 20 is very normal for most residential neighborhoods. You'll see.
Okay.
Could I ask a question while we're looking at these standards?
Yes.
When we're looking at the maximum building height in feet of 35, we just approved a development that took advantage of the affordable housing that increased the building height to, I can't remember what the number was, but it was 3 feet higher than the standard, or actually it ended up being more because they took advantage of this additional floor option. And I want to just clarify that if we change the maximum building height to 35, then someone can or cannot come along and say, I want to add another floor above that, or another 30% or whatever it is, to take advantage of the affordable housing grants or standards or tax rebates or whatever it is that allowed them to make that exception. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. That I can't remember the name of that legislation.
Senate Bill 1537.
Right.
This just came up, Marcy, so I can address it if you want, but I think Karen, you're right. What would happen is if it's 35 feet, then they would get that 10% allowance or a story, whatever the definition of a floor. I think it's a story is what the term was. That would then need to be defined. And Marcy, again, this goes back to definitions, and I hate to put something else on the list, but that may be something that we do define is what a story is.
We do need to define what a story is. I think you do actually, but yeah, you do have a definition for a story. I may have passed over it because it looked okay to me.
That's good.
So if I understand you right, Scott, if we say a maximum building height is 35 feet, someone can increase it above that.
Correct. For affordable housing products only, based on Senate Bill 1537.
And is that the 35 feet? Did we just pick that number because it's reasonable, or because it's quite a bit higher?
I put 35 feet in here because it's what we discussed at the last meeting as the height that you had reached in order to help the multi-family project go forward. And that, if I heard it right, it wasn't that big of a problem in terms of the context, and yet it added a lot in terms of quality of more generous floor-to-floor heights, better for living space, and from the difference between 28.5 and 35 feet is not that great, but the benefits are quite good. So that's why I chose 35 feet.
Okay, but then if someone can add another story above 35 feet, then That's what I'm trying to get at
I hear
is
that.
there ever going to be a maximum building height?
Yeah. This is a question that we'll have to look into
Well,
more.
and part of my reason for asking is that we have a lot of undeveloped lots that are on slopes. And so we would take the average height of the average elevation of the lot as the, you know, whatever that midpoint is, and the building height goes above that. So for lots that are above street level already, and if 35 feet is going to be the maximum, then potentially it could tower 40 or 45 feet above street level. And that, I just want to make, I'm not saying that's good or bad. I just want to be clear that that's what we're looking at, or, so that's,
I'm hearing there's two things to look into further. One is how Senate Bill 1537 would affect your ability to set a maximum, a higher height and a maximum height, and kind of have something that you can predict, right? But the other, to me, another issue that you're raising is how height is measured. And I did find this height, the definition you currently have, to be different than other codes I've looked at, where we're typically measuring from a midpoint of the roof, not just the grade. And I think we may want to look at a more complete or anticipatory of this situation type of definition of the height of a building. Okay, there's a question from Lee and one other person.
Yeah, thank you, Marcy. I must have been asleep last week when we talked about, or last month when we talked about building height. I find 35 feet to be incredibly obnoxious and very imposing on neighbors and the community as a whole. But this may not be the time to discuss that. You mentioned that we need to discuss building heights in general in more depth, and I'd be happy to lower my hand and wait until an appropriate time. Or can we discuss that today as a group?
I think we should discuss that today as a group. I think we should discuss the general idea of increasing the building height as a group.
Well, again, I'm just gonna raise my my concern about that. And Marcy, you just mentioned a moment ago, forgive me for utilizing your testimony, but you mentioned that 6.5 feet greater isn't that much. I think it's a lot. And this community has been based for years on much lower building heights. We don't have view easements here, but certainly it's going to obstruct a lot of people's views if that becomes the norm at 35 feet. And I do agree with you. I have some experience. I do agree with you about different ways of measuring building heights, but we can talk about that at another time. So I'll leave it to others to chime in. Thank you.
Do you want to take a little break and talk about the height for a minute here? I'm going to actually stop sharing my screen because I feel this is an area where I need better direction in order to move forward on a proposal. Should I call on Bert or John? How about Bert and then John?
I think, you know, additional height I'm a proponent of, but only if it's done in a elegant and form-based strategy. And a 35-foot tall square box that's unarticulated is not gonna work for our city. I think an example of you know, a sloped roof building that is more fitting to our community is really the affordable housing project that we just approved. So I think more homework needs to be done if we're going to increase the height, to make sure that the height is only increased in sloped roof buildings, for instance, and with some pretty significant criteria associated with it so that the scale of the building, you know, appears lower and more fitting with our community. But a 35-foot tall square unarticulated box isn't what we want.
Is it possible that it could be something that you permit in the middle housing 2 zone?
Yeah, I don't know, you know. I think the issue is I don't think we're gonna be very excited about a 45-foot tall building if even if it's an affordable housing project. So I think some homework on that. But that's where, you know, a real form-based code is pretty carefully described about the kind of form that gets to become the end result. And I don't think our height thing, while it, you know, has served the community well, it needs to be more than that if we're gonna go into a taller building.
Okay, I hear you.
Can I throw in one more caveat, Marcy? I just wanted to point out that I would recommend that we don't build our zoning code based on SB 1537. This is a Senate bill that sunsets. It's intended to spur affordable housing projects. So it will go away. I can't remember the date. I think it's 2027 or 2028. Don't quote me on that, but just my recommendation is that that's a one-time thing that's not going to be set in stone, that will sunset. So just to keep that in mind as well.
All right, John, and then Frank.
Well, first, I want to say I agree with everything that Bert just said. To add to that, I noticed that we no longer have the 8-foot side yard setback. So based on what we're talking about, this could, you know, we could have 35 feet right up to the 5-foot property line, imposing our shadow, our air availability, you know, free air availability. And my thought was that we had our discussion last time on the 35 foot of the height limit because of the workforce housing requirements, and perhaps in the supplement, well, wherever the best place to put it, we could have 35 feet as so we don't go through what we did last time in terms of having to make a judgment call on how high a workforce housing building is. Just they get the 3rd story, but only to 35 feet, and we retain our 28.5 or our 30 feet or whatever we choose to make it. But the key is what Bert said, in my opinion, and that is it's got to be form-based, and it's got to be, you know, I don't want to cast a 35-foot shadow on a building to the north in our quaint little town with small houses that are 1 and at most 2 stories right now. I think we need, I think like Bert said, I think we need to sort of not jump off of this 35-foot cliff at the moment and think about it and maybe define our form-based way of getting to 35 feet if that's what we choose to do.
Yeah, it's true that the daylight plane or the slope plane, the side yard plane that forces a step back or a sloped roof, that did go away. So I'm glad to hear that you noticed that. We can bring that in. That is a form-based, you know, approach. I'm also hearing, John, that, and I'm interested in Scott's feeling on this, but that the workforce housing gets the third story. This might go beyond the sunset of 1537, but it still needs to be according to a form-based kind of prescription that we
Right.
write for Manzanita.
Right. But we do want to incentivize workforce housing
Yeah.
as best we can and more density in that regard.
Right.
But
That sounds like a
And I
nice,
would just caution too that some of these products really are 3-story products. So they would need that 30 feet. I mean, if you think about
exactly.
the proposal we just heard, you know, the 9-foot ceilings, there were, and with all the mechanical between the floors, the request is for 33 feet, which is a little less than 35, but pretty dang close. So if we're thinking about wanting 9-foot ceilings in multifamily development types, then probably the 28 feet is probably a little shy, unless you're willing to stay with that 8-foot ceiling. So just
It's
something else to
shy
think about.
in terms of a 3-story building.
Correct. But if you only want 2, that's fine. But that just something
Well,
to consider.
that's sort of, I mean, do we want 3 stories as our city maximum? And that's what 35 gives you, basically. You can do a 3-story house in 35 feet and no problem. And I'm in favor of density, but
Yeah.
I'm also, we have to temper that with the Manzanita culture and the ambiance that we have in the town as it is.
Agreed.
okay, I'd like to hear from Frank and then Karen.
Oh, thank you. Scott, just for reference, Senate Bill 1537 sunsets on January 2nd, 2032, and can be renewed at the legislature's discretion. So it's not like it'll just go away automatically and then you'll never have to be concerned about it.
Thank you, Frank. Appreciate that.
Yeah, of course. Our standards prior to this, when we had the previous discussion on the workforce housing, was 20. I'm going to use round numbers because I know they're 28 point whatever it was, but it was 28. The state mandated we had to give them to 34 or 33, 34, somewhere around there. And then we voted to give them the additional 3 feet.
Correct.
And that's just for that type of workforce housing. That seems to be pretty much in the ballpark, though, because if it's if our standard's 28 and the housing dictates by the state that we got to go to 34, and then we can allow 1 or 2 extra feet like we did, I don't think we're far off. But I agree with John, it has to be just for affordable housing. And that's what that Senate bill stipulates. It's not for all housing. There's no way you're going to just let people start building 3-story homes, single family residences.
Karen?
Thank you. I'm not sure quite how extensive a form-based approach to design goes, but in the past, the Planning Commission has been very reluctant to require any specific design plans for residential homes. We have no design review set for that because the city has been reluctant to tell people what to do with their own home. And so I'm not quite sure. I mean, I think a form-based approach, I think, is going to take a whole lot more explanation, a whole lot more thinking. So at this point, I would be reluctant to change that building height standard to above, I don't know, 30 feet. And, give people a little bit of extra headroom if they want to, especially if they're building, a duplex or a triplex or something like that on a single lot to provide additional housing for people that need it. But I'm reluctant to allow a standard that would say everyone who wants to build a single family home can build a 3-story home and tower over their neighbors with no other additional design standards. So I would be reluctant to change we have the different slope of the roof allows you to do a different kind of setback. I would not want to change that at this point until we have a lot more thorough understanding of what we're talking about as far as a form-based approach goes. especially if we're talking about someone building a home that they want to occupy on their own lot. I would hope that they would not be too far different from homes that people have built on their own lots already. So I would be reluctant to change that standard at this moment. That's,
Yes, I'm hearing a lot of reservation about the height increase until more information about the form, shape, the form-based elements of the code, which are supplemental standards mostly. Until you see that, it sounds like we people reserve judgment on, or really, I guess I'm hearing a lot of hesitation about increasing the height at all, even with a form-based approach. So maybe we should table this discuss. I feel like I've got enough of more subtlety about this issue now as a result of this conversation, and we could go on to other items for now. But I still want to hear from Tom and Brad. So, Tom, you're muted.
The affordable housing project we just approved, they got 10% above the 28.5, right? And then we still needed to give them a variance for an additional amount, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Can I, Tom, we did that, but when it went on the appeal, what happened was that the attorneys that reviewed it for the developer realized that the Senate bill also said 1 story. So they amended the findings to say, we approved the additional percent, but they were allowed up to 1 story. So technically they could have started with that request and not the percentage and gotten what they wanted even without it. So I just wanted to make that really clear. That their initial request was for the percent increase, not for the story. If they would have asked for the story from the get-go, they would not have needed to ask for the percent increase, if that makes sense.
Okay.
The one additional story. I'm not sure if that helps or makes it more muddy. Sorry.
Well, I guess my view is I was only willing to give them more because it was required by law to give them more, and our legislators, our representatives in Salem decided that for this particular use for affordable housing, then they're entitled to that. But otherwise, I'm reluctant to go any higher for somebody that just wants a better view of the ocean at the expense of their neighbors. So I would leave things as they are, and just if the law says for as long as it lasts that you got to give affordable housing an additional amount, okay, so be it. But I'd be reluctant to extend it to anyone else.
Agreed.
Brad, you're next.
Try and keep this brief because it might be digressing from where you want to go. But when Karen mentioned design review, and we talk about building heights, and we put it into context to residential, but say a fourplex, and we don't have design review for residential, but the residential becomes a certain scale in a neighborhood, should that not pass through some level of design review?
There will be clear and objective design standards that are quite detailed. That'll be part of the package that comes to you next. There will be dimensional standards that you have to meet for transparency, for primary entry, for facade articulation. They're planning to bring to you a sort of standard set, and we can build from there.
Okay.
But and some of these are menu based. So we don't have design review of these housing types anymore because we're trying to move them into clear and objective, by right approvals.
And that's Marcy's forthcoming in past June. And so it's not something that,
No, that's part of this package. That will be part of
Yes.
our next work session. That'll probably be the biggest focus of our next work session.
okay. So I'll look forward to that.
No, that's really important because really the idea is that we don't have to do a design review as a design review board or as a planning commission, because that's embedded in our code with clear and objective standards. And when Marcy says menu, she says, well, you have to do these specific elements to meet our design requirements to be able to be built, which basically is what you're doing in a design review anyway, because you have to meet those criteria in the design review ordinance. So it's a way that you can do it that someone can come in and meet those design review standards through a clear and objective pathway.
John, did you still have a question?
Well, I had a question, but it kind of got answered and it's kind of get thrown into our next work session anyway. So I'll probably bring it up then. It had to do with the form base and been down that road a few times. And I mean, I like it, but it still ends up having some loose ends, no
Yeah,
matter how detailed you think you are.
let's talk about it more at the next work session.
Right.
All right, so going back to the package then, I still do want to talk about this floor area ratio issue here. And I did prepare some things for you, for people who need visual material, including myself. Did some tests of this, so we could talk about it. So first of all, the proposal, let me describe it as we discussed it in last couple of work sessions, was that you asked me to come back with a proposal to limit the size of a dwelling. It is in its simplest communication. So I am very familiar with a number of cities that have done this. You know, Manzanita is not Portland, but Portland has been doing this since they passed their residential infill project. They've been limiting the floor area ratio of a first house and then granting floor area ratio to subsequent dwellings as a kind of bonus. And it's worked quite well for them in terms of reducing the cost of homes and also preventing demolition of homes. So what I have proposed is it's a three-part thing. It is one, first, let's establish a floor area ratio for residential, which you don't currently have. You only have floor area ratio today for commercial. And that is approximately a 0.65 to 1. So it's a starting place for us to discuss. And then this footnote here is the kind of second and third part of the standard, which is, so we're establishing a floor area ratio maximum for the first dwelling. And I've just done a really simple thing here. We could do this two ways. That so the first option is limit it to an absolute square foot maximum, or you could limit it to 8% of the floor area. So you may have a maximum floor area ratio of 0.65 to 1 for your lot, but you establish a something smaller for the first dwelling and then grant additional FAR for subsequent dwellings up to that maximum. There's two different ways that cities have done this, and they are percentage of the FAR or a smaller portion of the FAR or an absolute square footage maximum. So I did prepare some information just to help this discussion. Now you're all planning commissioners, so you probably all know what floor area ratio is, but I just want to make it clear for members of the audience. Right now you have a development capacity or building envelope. This is kind of the shape of it. This is that plane that John, you mentioned, that currently exists. And this is a lot. This is that 20-foot setback. This is just a 5,000 square foot lot. And what we call the building envelope is the thing that's defined by the setbacks and the height and the daylight plane. And in some cases where you have a lot coverage maximum like you do in the R2, that also will work to make that shape smaller. And then within that, you can fit some floors. And so if we're kind of going to calculate the effective floor area of your current zoning, we see that right now, let's just start with R4. The effective floor area ratio is 0.88 to 1. And I want to compare that to your C1 FAR, which is 0.65 to 1. I mean, it's kind of interesting. I think that it's so much greater. But again, you don't use FAR. And I think that this is typical of us in this, of cities in this, or small towns, especially small coastal towns in this day and age where you never had really large houses built. But now sometimes people take advantage of, they build to the absolute maximum side yard, the absolute maximum height, et cetera. They take advantage of this full building envelope. And so, and a lot of places are deciding that they need to institute a floor area ratio for residential. But just to go through these, the R3 effective FAR is 0.87 to 1, and the R2 effective FAR is 0.64 to 1. And that's smaller because you have a maximum lot coverage. That applies only in R2. So at the last meeting when we were having this discussion, I think Tom, you asked like how do we compare these shapes and sizes of buildings to something that we know? So this isn't, these aren't residential, but it's something that we can look at. The Little Apple and the Polaris Gallery, interestingly, if you look at their floor area ratios, which they're in the C1 zone, so they would be allowed to have a much larger, but this is where they fall. Little Apple 0.33 to 1, Polaris Gallery 0.55 to 1. And that has probably more to the fact that they don't take advantage of the full floor area ratio that has been granted may have more to do with the fact that they have to provide parking on site than anything. So that's just some background information that I thought might be helpful for people to visualize, and we could have this discussion about the 0.65 to 1. Let's have the discussion about, do people want to impose an FAR? Are we interested in that? Do people still want to, are people still interested in some way to limit a dwelling size? Let's take those two to start. Lee.
Thanks, Marcy. I like the question. I think that a floor area ratio provides a much better measure of the effect of the building, the size of the building, as compared to a maximum square footage of, I think we were talking about 2,500. Is that right? So I like the floor area ratio as a more effective means of measuring building size. So that's my 2 cents.
Are you interested? Okay, well, we'll maybe just leave it there. So floor area ratio to you would be a way to more effectively measure building size.
Yes.
Okay. John?
Well, I like the concept of floor area ratio, and I think 0.65 is reasonable for a lot of the lots in Manzanita. But there are 10,000 square foot lots, for instance, and I don't want to see a 6,500 square foot house on one of them. And as somebody pointed, I think it was Scott, that is trending in the world today. People are maximizing their buildable area. They're building as much as they possibly can, possibly for a financial reason. But part of our job is to keep the flavor of the town we have. And I like the way you've done it currently, Marcy. I like the 0.65 as a blanket, but limit even a big lot, limit it to 2,500 square feet, which is a reasonable size, I think, a reasonable size house for our little beach community. I mean, I don't see a reason you need a 6,500 square foot single family dwelling in Manzanita as your second home.
Who else? Let's see. We had a couple of hands up. Did they go away?
No, Karen's up.
Okay, Karen and Frank, I think you had your hands up.
Yeah, thank you. I was involved in the planning commission when oh, sorry, my knee just went. When we imposed the 0.65 floor area ratio on the commercial zone. And the reason that we did that was to ensure that the kind of businesses that are attracted to Manzanita are pedestrian scale, pretty much pedestrian scale. I mean, that was the purpose, was to so that no buildings really terribly overshadowed the town. And it's been pretty effective, I think. We've had some pretty decent development, with the exception of a single family home that was just built, but they're not subject to the 0.65 because it's not commercial. So that's something that I want to look at further down the road is the commercial code. But I agree with John that a maximum building size of 2,500 or 0.65, whichever is greater. I mean, whichever is less, sorry. That makes sense to me for residential. Thank you.
So we had Frank and then Brad. Is Frank?
Yes. Yeah, thank you. I think it's a pretty much standard assumption that a comfortable living space is about 600 to 700 square feet per person that might be living in a house. So if you have a family of 5, you can do some quick math to see that you're at 3,000 square feet for living comfortably. I know we talk a lot about people having second homes out here, but there's a lot of us that don't have a second home here. It's our primary residence. And to limit it to 2,500, I think is a bit arbitrary and a bit small. If I have a family of 5, be it because I have a couple of children or I have my in-laws living with us, and you're trying to cap it at 2,500, why? I just don't understand that. That's too small and it's not reasonable. Yes, I don't want to see a 6,500 square foot house either, John. I agree with you. But I think we have to find a better ratio that's a bit more realistic, and especially with that standard of comfortable living of 600 to 700 square feet per person. Thank you.
So Frank, are you saying that some limit, but 2,500 is too small?
Yes, yeah. I think 2,500 is just not realistic. These are not homes, because you can't just assume everybody's building a second home here. Some of us build homes to live in. And some of us may need, not me, but some of us may need a bigger home. 2,500 is not, or even if you capped it at 3,000, 3,000 is not huge. This is not just a cabin, Manzanita, the people that live here, this is not a cabin town anymore. People don't live in 900 square foot cabins. Some people do, but families that move here and people that have families and work and provide services to everybody else that lives here, they need space. So I just think it's too small.
5 times 700. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Frank.
Well, no, it's between 600 and 700 is basically the comfortable living space that I think you would get everybody to agree upon. That's pretty much a standard. So yeah, somewhere between, probably, but that's a family of 5. What if there's a family of 6? So you've got all these things that you have to wrestle with. I'm just saying, I think 2,500 is too low.
So
I don't mind a cap, but not at 2,500.
Your more generous allowance for each person, 700 times 5 is 3,500. Would that be a better number?
Yeah, I think you got to be somewhere around there. And even if you go on the low end of 600 per square feet, a times 5, then you're at least at 3,000. So I think that's, a more realistic minimum.
If this is helpful for people that need a visual, I live in a 2,200 square foot, 4-bedroom, 2.5 bath, 2-car garage home. Very standard. And I have 4-person household. And that's a very standard size home at 22. But you're right, Frank, I agree. If you have more than 4 or 5 people, you might need more than, 2,500.
Oh, and not even if you just need it, if you want it, if you want to have a
Yeah.
little bit more space in your house,
Yeah.
and for us to come along and clip you at 2,500, when you own the land that you can build a house on, I just think it's a little bit, it's like, hey, look, okay, we can tell you what to do and what to build, but let's give them some, upside on, and I'm not talking about building McMansions at 5,000 square feet.
Yeah, I just wanted to let everyone know that, yes, generally, 4-bedroom, 2.5 bath home is about between 2,000 and 2,500 square feet.
So Brad, before we go to you, I just wanted to go back to the question, who is it that asked at the very beginning of the meeting if the floor area ratio should or should not include the garage? If
Oh, that
garage
was
is
Lee.
Tom or
exempt.
Lee.
That's me.
Okay. Okay, so Brad, what?
Yeah, I'm just seeking clarity then, because I think maybe John mentioned something a moment ago, and it's going to pick up on what Frank just said. Did I understand things correctly that 2,500 square feet could even be limited to a 10,000 square foot lot, or is it unique to a 5,000 square foot lot?
Well, it's one way of establishing a maximum. You could have what Portland does, which is that it's a percentage of the total FAR, but only a percentage of it is allowed for the first dwelling. A large percentage, but it generally, in that case, it would graduate in size with the size of the lot. The size of your primary dwelling would increase.
That's how I understood it originally. So if you had a 5,000 square foot lot, right now we're talking about put aside the FAR on the code that is being currently proposed to be a maximum of 2,500 square feet, unless one did an ADU. But as you graduate up to 6,000 or 10,000, that 2,500 square foot limit still doesn't stand, correct?
No, it does. I mean, if you
It
go
does?
that way, I'm trying to establish these two different ways that you could measure, you could limit, you could establish a square footage limitation that is the same no matter what size your lot is. Or you could establish a percentage of your total floor area ratio that is permitted for that first dwelling. I'm trying to get a sense of where people.
I think it needs to
Great.
adjust as the lot increases, as I think, as I asked the question, and now as you're asking for opinions, I think as the lot increases, the allowance for the square footage should increase proportionally. Because I
So
don't think you can
you have a
regulate.
7,000 square foot lot, you should get a larger square footage for your primary dwelling. If you have a 5,000 square foot lot, it should be smaller.
Well, no, I'm starting with the basis of, I think I'm using the basis though of the 5,000 for example, that I think was regular, which was proposed. I think we had the 2,500 square foot lot. Let's start with that was originally proposed, correct?
2,500 square, let me just.
Square foot, I'm sorry, house, not lot. I'm sorry. Let me clarify.
The proposal is you have a maximum of 0.65 to 1 for your lot, no matter, so that's, increases your total floor area ratio increases with the size of your lot. Let me make this bigger. But for the first dwelling, you're limited to 2,500 or some number, but it's an absolute number. It stays the same no matter how big your lot is. And or you could do an alternative approach would be to set that first dwelling as limited to a percent of your percentage of your FAR. So it would increase. So you'd get a larger primary dwelling with a larger lot.
So I think Marcy's saying the same thing. It increases, but it's a percentage of your FAR rather than a size based on the lot size. So your percentage goes up based on the lot size, but it's not a square footage number.
That's not exactly what I'm saying, but
Okay,
it's
thank you.
good enough for this. I mean, I'm definitely hearing that people don't want an absolute single number, that they
Yeah.
want this, if you've got a larger lot, you should get a larger
I think there
primary.
needs to be flexibility and you shouldn't regulate it to a size. I think Frank's, if you will, his argument for conversation purposes, I think has merit. And looking at the past just to scale to keeping a home small, I think is looking a little bit backwards. I think there's other criteria. I don't have the answer for what that other criteria is, and maybe others do, but I don't think just I get a little bit concerned with regulating it to a size that may not support a full-time resident that's got a family.
Okay, let's hear from Tom and then Bert.
I'm following behind as usual. Okay, so it sounds like there's two numbers we're talking about to limit the size of the house on the lot. One of them is how the FAR's, how big of the lot it covers, right? The structure. And the other is the absolute size of the thing. Okay, I'm in favor. You asked this earlier of an FAR. Yeah, I'm in favor of having that so we don't have a big structure dominating the whole lot. I'm also in favor of having a fixed size of square footage. It may not be 25, but I don't want to see that grow with the size of the lot because that looks to me like you're going to be wasting land. People are going to buy bigger lots in order to get a bigger house. Frank has persuaded me that for people who live here full time, unlike me, 2,500 may be too small. 3,000 seems a good compromise then. But I would be in favor of both limitations, the FAR and an absolute size, square footage, not varying with the size of the lot.
Yeah, a not to exceed sort of number.
Right.
Yeah.
Who said that? Not to exceed?
Oh, that was me, Frank. Yeah, whatever that number is, like not to exceed, you know.
And if Frank can live with 3,000, for that number, I can live with it too.
Well, this is helpful. I am trying to get a sense of where we can land to move forward. So, Bert, what do you have?
Well, I mean, it's a very important conversation. Lots of good viewpoints. I come from a 1,624 square foot, 1926 house that has 3 bedrooms that worked fine for our family. So, you know, scale is different in the 21st century. I kind of like this kind of compromise thing where there's an FAR, but there's a maximum size. And if you do more, if you have a second unit or more affordable housing, then somehow you're able to get more square footage in that primary residence. But I also want to make sure that we're not limiting, you know, by setting this 0.65 that we start to limit the cottage clusters or other stuff. And so just need to make sure, you know, that we're not getting ourselves backwards or in some kind of a loop. And I'm sure you can make sure of that. But anyway, so I'm a fan of 3,000 sounds good. Although a 0.65 on a 5,000 square foot lot is 3,250. So I think 3,000 is a pretty good number, and then encourage people to get more square footage by having a second unit or more units on the lot. Maybe it needs to, the FAR needs to go up a little bit with it too, if you have multiple units as part of your project.
Okay, very helpful. John, and then we're gonna move to another discussion.
Well, uh, um, yeah, the 2,500 is definitely arbitrary. I mean, I disagree with Frank that everybody needs a 3,500 square foot house. I think the 600 to
No, I
700
didn't say
square feet.
everybody.
I think the 600 to 700 square, I knew what you meant, per families, it's sort of a graduated number, the 600 to 700 square feet for 3 to 4 people probably works. When you start adding the 5th and 6th person, that number goes down to 300 to 400 for the larger structure, but that's irrelevant. If you want 3,000, I'm okay with that. I just wanted a limit on it. I don't want to see the 0.65 be allowed on a 10,000 square foot lot, because we've seen what happens in town. I would like to encourage multiple housing though. So, if we're going to limit it at a fixed number and you do have a 10,000 square foot lot, I would say, you know, you are granted another couple hundred square feet if you build a second unit, or even more if you build a third unit. Because our goal here is to encourage density, encourage more housing units, not larger units. Well, let me rephrase. I say we. My goal is to encourage more units, not bigger units, for families. I know we have families right now out there looking for a place to live, and they don't want 3,000 square feet. They don't want 3,500 square feet. They'd be fine in 1,500 square feet.
So, John, could I cut you off for just a minute? I
Sure.
think you made your point. If there's more, feel free to go ahead, but I wanted to make sure that we heard from Lee as well. I think he's the only.
Okay. Well,
not
I think everybody knows my point, so I'll just shut up and we can move on.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Well, Karen, I kind of started this suggesting that the floor area ratio is the way to go. And I was remiss by not including a maximum square footage as well, which several of my colleagues have suggested is the right way to go. And I would have to agree. I think we don't need 7,000 square foot homes, but Frank very eloquently pointed out the need for some families needing more square footage than others. So I could easily support 3,000. Right now we're at 2,500. I could easily support 3,000 and a floor area ratio of 0.65 with a consideration, I thought Bert phrased that well, with a consideration that folks be given an opportunity to have more square footage if they're building ADUs or duplexes instead of single families.
Yes. Yes, okay. Thank you so much. This is really helpful. So look for a revised proposal, a refined proposal. So I have one last question to ask you about this table, the development standards. And I think this will make sense as a question when now that we've had the discussion about floor area ratio. It's about the lot size maximum. Do people, this is not a standard that you currently have. Is this a standard that we need? It is, the way it's said is 7,000 square feet is your lot size maximum in the middle housing 1. And then for middle housing 2 and 3, it's 10,000. That would, if we go with this floor area ratio approach and a maximum square footage for a dwelling unit, that maximum floor area ratio would increase, of course, with your lot size, that you could add more additional dwellings on with that under a BERT style bonus.
Mercy, if we have a townhouse project in MR3, for instance, uh, the good thing about a maximum lot size would be that it would create a series of smaller buildings, right? But on a 10,000 square foot lot on an MR3 with a 0.65, then you'd have a 6,500 square foot maximum square footage to distribute over your townhouses. And so I just want to make sure that we're not, as we go through this, that certainly there's a single family conversation, but correspondingly, I want to make sure that we're allocating enough square footage for these other housing typologies to be successful. And I don't know what the answer is, but that's why we hired you.
So the townhouse would be on its own lot though, so it would be subject to its own floor area ratio. But I think the scenario you're drawing is one that would apply to a quadplex, say, and we'd want to make sure that that distributed over an allowed a quadplex. Okay. I see John, you have your hand up, and Tom.
Well, I mean, we've just permitted the Heron's Nest or Rest, which was, 2 point something acres on a lot. So for a cottage cluster, I mean, obviously 10,000 square foot lot's not gonna work. I'm not sure, I start, when you first said that, I'm going, I don't have an opinion on this. But I think we probably don't need a maximum. Because we have whatever the number turns out to be, 3,000 square feet as a residential upper limit. If you have a 15,000 square foot lot, well, that encourage you, even big houses, it would encourage you to build 5 of them. If it fit within the 0.65 FAR. I haven't done the math on it, but I guess my opinion is we don't really need an upper limit.
Okay, let's hear from Tom.
Yeah, I want to second what Bert said, because earlier I spoke in favor of restrictions on the size of a structure, both the overall size and how it fits on the lot. But as he pointed out, I don't want those restrictions to defeat my other goal of increasing the opportunities for multifamily dwellings on a lot. So I don't know how that balances out. You probably do, others may do, but I don't want to shoot myself in the foot that way.
Yeah.
So I second what Bert said in that regard.
Okay. I think we're going to have a lot to talk about, and I think the next refined version will show how we can incentivize additional units with a floor area ratio, but also limit the size of a dwelling to 3,000. So
yeah, I want my cake and eat it too. So
cottage clusters are exempt too. Just that is a statutory requirement. Cottage clusters are exempt from floor area ratio, from maximum density, etc. They are like kind of a pure form-based code housing type. All right, I'm saying, Frank, you're the last one on this topic.
Yeah, I just wanted to go along sort of with what Bert and Tom were saying. And then Marcy, is it just a blanket formula? I mean, because we were talking about specifically residential. Are there variations though, when you get outside of the cottage clusters or single family homes? Are there variations that can be applied if they're trying to build a duplex or a quadplex or anything like that? Or is it just here's the numbers, plug them in?
I think the way it's supposed to work is you have 0.65 let me go back. Let me share this drawing for a second.
Okay, thank you.
So, say you're in this zone here. This is the R3, but it will become the middle housing 2, and you're going to have a 0.65 FAR that applies. You have this amount of Jello mold, kind of like Jello, and you say you get your building floor area ratio up here. We calculated it's about 4,300. You get about 4,300 square feet of space to build. That's rough because this is a bigger FAR, but let's say it's 4,000. You get 4,000 square feet on a 5,000 square foot lot. That's your maximum FAR. Or, I'm sorry, it might be more like what Bert was saying. It's more like 3,500 on an R5 on a 5,000 square foot lot. You'll get that extra bit of FAR to use in a scenario where you're building an additional unit. And the larger your lot, the more that extra FAR you get. So if you have a 10,000 square foot lot, you could have quite a lot of FAR left over from your 3,000 square foot primary dwelling to use for extra dwellings. Does that make sense? That's the concept. And I might not be doing the math right, but we'll come back with math and 3D
Right.
models that show you the options.
Okay, thank you.
So no max on the lot. Let large lots have extra FAR that they can use for additional dwelling units. It's kind of what I'm hearing. Okay, we are actually almost at the end. I just want to go over the parking stuff with you. So I'm going to share one last time, and then I think we can end, I hope, in about 10 minutes. Okay, off-street parking requirements are listed in this table. These are the main changes. It really has more to do with the number. So if we do incorporate accessory dwelling units into this code amendment, I would propose you could have one space, but I would ask you to consider eliminating the parking requirement to none for ADUs. In any case, on lots in the C1, we have to reduce it to one space per each dwelling unit. And where is my main setting? Sorry, I must have eliminated a page, but it's one space per dwelling unit. Something is wrong with my table here. Yeah, one space per dwelling unit on dwellings on all lots, on all middle housing. And right now you require one space for each dwelling for the first dwelling and 2 spaces for each additional dwelling unit. But we're going down to 1 per dwelling unit. I guess it's pretty clear. Don't really need track change amendment page. Any questions about that?
I have a comment. It seems to me that when we were talking about ADUs a couple of years ago, that we couldn't require a parking space for an ADU. I think that was in previous legislation from 2020 or 2021, something like that.
Yeah, Karen, I'm glad you brought that up because it's been made clear to me by people at the state that that rule for ADUs applies to design review, but not to parking. It's actually, the state law is silent on parking.
Okay.
You can't, it's actually a choice you can make yourselves.
Okay. I'm fine with, I'm not actually fine with limiting parking because it's going to change the way our city looks and feels. Particularly if people are parking on the street or because we don't have sidewalks. So I'm grateful that the city council has reduced the speed limits to 20 miles per hour on all streets. I think that will help, but I'm perfectly fine with at least taking a deep breath and saying, let's not require as much parking as we have in the past.
So thank you, Karen. Any other last comments about this package or desire for information in the next package beyond what we've talked about? I see that. Let's go to Karen. Did you take your hand down or did you have something to say on this?
I do have one thing, and this is just purely a form, not to do with any of the concepts. But if we're changing the zone designations from R1, R2, R3, R4, SRR to new, those need to be changed throughout the entire zoning ordinance. There are a lot of places where like a home occupation or like a cottage industry, it refers to certain zone designations. So I don't know if that's something that you're going to do, just to find and replace on all of those as
Yes.
part of this update, but I would appreciate it if somebody would.
Yeah, it's my job.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That's it.
Let's go to Bert and then John.
I'll just be quick. Yeah, I think no parking for the ADUs is a good move. And then also the reduction just to 1 per unit. But I would also think that for discussion that units that are, say, 500 square feet or less should not have parking required. And once again, parking space at 200 square feet for a 500 square foot unit, it just doesn't make sense and just adds and compounds to the cost of the smaller units. So
What would be your top limit then? 2,500 square foot lot?
no, just I'm talking about unit size and the required parking. I would say no parking required for an ADU. And then for discussion, no parking required for units 500 square feet or less, which is essentially a studio apartment. I have lots of other things about parking, but we're going to focus just on the housing.
Okay. Thank you.
Just to clarify, what Bert, you're talking about on-site parking, right?
Well, right at the moment, it's parking, no matter where you put it, is required. And I'm not sure how we're going to demonstrate that parking is available on street. That's something that's
Right.
kind of got to get worked out. But I'm just not a fan of small units having to have parking spaces.
I agree with that. I don't want to get to a point where the off-street parking in front of a house is designated for that house or that ADU or something like that. I don't see how we can make that work.
You're probably right, Joe.
Okay, we had one more hand.
Marcy, I just wanted to say, the reason I had my hand up because I just wanted to say you and Scott and the team have done a great job of getting us where we are right now from where we started. I'm amazed and good job.
Thanks for that. We have a lot more work to do.
We do, but you got us to this point, which I'm,
Yeah.
kudos.
I appreciate your help getting there. Thank you very much. Frank.
Yes, and I echo what John just said. And then just for clarification, the law in Oregon is that cities our size may not require additional off-street parking for ADUs in areas zoned for single-family homes. So that's not really an option on our part, even if we wanted to.
Where are you reading that, Frank? I'd love it if you'd send that to me because I thought that was true. And I've done
Yeah,
been
so
doing
it's-
this for
Yeah,
years.
it started as Senate Bill 1051 back in 2017, and then House Bill 2001 in 2019. And then there's been subsequent LCDC rules that local governments generally cannot require off-street parking for ADUs.
We'll look into that, Marcy, too, because I'm now remembering it might be cities of 10,000 or more.
Right, exactly. That's
Yeah,
it.
the-
That's it,
y-
Scott. Yeah, that was the thing. I was trying to remember where yeah. Because of Manzanita, I was looking into this in a more particular way than I ever had to before, and I found that little silent point. So
Yeah, I think it's for 10,000 or more. I did actually I did Rockaway's ADU ordinance probably 5 years ago, and they chose to have one space per ADU as well. And I looked into this back then, and unless things have changed, I
Well,
believe
Scott, this says urbanized areas of cities of greater than 2,500 and counties greater than 15,000.
well, there you go. It might have changed then since the 10,000. So we need to look into that, Frank. I appreciate that. That's a
Okay.
good find.
Oh, no problem.
well, that is the end of today's work session. Thanks for all of your great help here getting us to this point. We'll have another work session and then we'll start to have the hearings, and we will also be briefing City Council. That's as part of our next steps.
Okay, so we're gonna have another work session next month,
Yes.
and at that point, so then hearings, are you talking about Planning Commission having an additional
I
hearing
think
on
we
the?
have to talk to Layla about this, Scott, because we're aiming for code adoption ready amendments package. That's what we have to deliver. So actually the hearings part is, I may have spoken too soon on that.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think we'll check, Karen. I think originally the schedule was to actually have the public hearing at the next planning commission meeting, so that we could be basically when we get to June, we could have our first hearing. If the planning commission chooses to then send it at the next meeting, then we would have the next we could go into adoption hearing at city council. So that was the original schedule, and it still is, that we would hold a public hearing at the next meeting. I think Layla and Marcy need to put our heads together to make sure that we could still pull that off based on the input that we got during this meeting.
Okay, so let me ask the commission this. If we still have a few more loose ends to tie up, and that we won't have code ordinance ready language to present to council, are you willing to have a second meeting in May, or late May, so before the June council meeting, so that we can vote on a package to send? Commissioners willing to do that? Because
Whatever it takes.
we're an hour over our projected time for today, and I have a feeling that as we get details more and more refined, that we'll need an extra hour next time as well. So if you're all willing, try to keep some space open at some point.
Yeah,
And
sounds
again,
good.
I'll have to confirm that with city staff, because we need them. We need them too.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Karen, my only other thought would be that it could be that we do go ahead and hold the hearing, and we do a work session, then a hearing, and then we can continue the hearing if we're not comfortable. That's always an option too, just in case, because there's public noticing required for hearings and a whole bunch of dates we work back from. It may be that we do schedule it as a public hearing, but that doesn't mean the decision has to be made at the next meeting.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Marcy. Wow.
Yeah, Marcy, awesome.
Thanks,
A
everyone.
lot.
That was a lot, and I feel much clearer about this whole process.
Good.
So,
Great job, Marcy.
okay, Scott, do we have anything on our next? Scott Gebhardt, do we have anything? Please don't tell me that we have a major land use decision to make.
Not in May, so we could continue this in May. And I'm looking at June for a possible subdivision.
Okay,
Would be for Karen's Rest over on 3rd.
okay, all right, great. Thank you so much. Any other updates we need to hear about?
That's about all I have.
Okay,
I'll try to fix the issue we had. I've got a discussion with Josh when this is over, so.
okay. Well, thank you for hanging in there with us, Scott.
I couldn't even stop the meeting. That's how bad it was on my end, so.
wow.
Yeah. Okay, let's hope that never happens again.
Yeah, I don't need to see that again.
If you're all ready, I'm willing to adjourn the meeting. Okay,
All right, thanks, everybody.
you.
Bye
thank
all.
you so much, everybody.